This is Larry Will of Mount Airy, Maryland, and you're listening to the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM, Montreal.
Welcome, everyone, to the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal. My name is Sheldon. I'm here with Jill. We thank you for tuning in today. 30 minutes of news and information from the world of radio. And you can reach us if you like. Any questions or comments? Email is radioreport@yahoo.com. We're live streaming and archived at ckut.ca. Our Facebook group is International Radio Report, and we had a really spike in interest this week. We want to welcome David, Craig, Elizabeth, Greg, Wilbur, Wes, Laney, Ishak, Adam, and Charles, bringing us all the way up to 830 members in the group. So we thank you all for joining in there. If you haven't done so already, simple to do. Go to Facebook, search for International Radio Report, click the join the group button, and away you go. You can participate along with everyone else. We have our YouTube channel, which also seems to be very attractive to people. It is called International Radio Report. We have 670 subscribers there. So that's all of the different ways to track us down and find us and listen to the show. On the YouTube channel, of course, you can listen to the current show and previous shows that are archived there as well. An interesting comment we had from a YouTuber this week who said, I watch the show every week on YouTube, which is kind of weird when you think it's a radio program, really. But maybe Gilles can explain a little bit more on that a bit later. First off, though, Gilles, you've got something to say about last week's program, and we thank those people who did get in touch with us to let us know that something weird was happening.
Yes, actually, I noticed it before I saw all the comments. I turned on my radio, and I was like, no, we didn't talk about that yesterday. The wrong show is playing suddenly. And, by the time that you realize what is happening, because, we know with CKUT sometimes weird things happen, I eventually noticed that, there's a 3 in 3rd of July and there's a 3 in 31st of July. And somehow my brain kind of just didn't process the information correctly. I uploaded an old show instead of the actual show. So I felt bad all day and I felt bad all week, but at least there are other ways of listening or watching us. That was at least good for that, because if we only had CKUT and their archives, then there wouldn't have not been any show for that week.
Yeah, we mentioned the YouTube channel too, and the person that said they watched the show. Now, if you listen to the show live or you use the CKUT archives, you may not be aware that you actually get a little bit more by checking it out on YouTube. And that's something that you add when you put the file up there.
Yeah, so when I put the file, since YouTube is a video platform, what happens is I got to do the upload in a video format. So what do you do when you have a radio show and you want to have a video format? I add pictures that always have something to do with the stories that we actually talk about. And sometimes I put a lot of pictures. It's really like a slideshow, and each story can have more than one picture. It's not just a static picture for 5 minutes. Very often I'll have several pictures with, the different people we talk about, or, different aspect of what the story is talking about. So everything I find that goes with the story in a visual way, I just add. So there's a visual aspect to it. You also have something to look at.
Yeah, it's a nice little bonus as well, and we certainly thank you for doing that. People who use the YouTube channel, obviously you're aware of that, and if you haven't checked out the show, even if you've listened to it already, you may want to go and look at it on YouTube and see how it differs from what you hear on the radio or online. So the one thing that proved interesting last week, though, is that people are paying attention and they're actually listening, because I got called right away. Norma Martel called me. There were messages up on Facebook right away. Hey, what's going on? It's the wrong show. And so that's good. People are paying attention, and they're wanting that show to be there. So it's encouraging that people took the time to do that. So, and just think, you can add a whole 30 minutes to our blooper tape.
Yes. There's going to be a lot of it soon.
The show was so popular, we ran it again. Anyways, so yeah, hopefully you're listening to the right one this week, and I don't think she'll be wanting to do that again, because all the jokes were flying around that he was going to get fired and all of that. So anyways, so let's get on to this week's stories. And the first one we mentioned, Normand Martel, a regular listener, he called me during the week with information about a power outage on Mount Royal, which is the mountain on the middle of the island of Montreal where we're located, that was affecting the Cogeco company's radio stations. Now, for those that don't know, there's one main broadcast tower in the city of Montreal. It's on top of Mount Royal. They want the highest peak that they can get on the island. And most of our FM stations on radio and our TV stations, antennas, are located there so that the signals can get out as best as possible and as far as possible. Well, a power outage took place on Tuesday on Mount Royal, affecting the main broadcasting tower, and that affected a number of Montreal broadcasters, in particular the Cogeco-owned radio stations, which are CHMP, CQA FM, CFGL, and CKBE, which is the Beat. Hydro-Quebec reported faulty equipment at 1:13 p.m. and estimated to have the problem resolved by 5:15, so 4 hours of outage. The outage resulted in the Cogeco stations experiencing 20 to 30 dB below the other stations at the CBC's transmitter antenna facility on the mountain. According to Normand, this was the result of apparently Cogeco not having a sufficient backup generator. Oddly, though, one of their stations, the Beat, didn't seem to be experiencing the reduction in signal. The problem at the site has been resolved and everything's back to normal. We do know that during the week, CKUT was actually down for two afternoons, I think it was, for just an hour or two at a time, as they were doing some maintenance on the tower. It's possible other stations were off at that time as well, but we're not totally sure about that, but more than likely. So I guess this is a problem. All of the transmitters at one location, for one thing. There's a major breakdown at that site, then things happen.
The interesting part of this is probably they're gambling a little bit on the fact that, the power in Quebec is pretty stable and we rarely have really big outages. So they're probably saying, well, maybe not invest too much there because it doesn't happen often, and it's maybe enough. Of course, it depends on your audience. I would guess at reduced power, the distance the signal made was much less. So it's, I don't know. It shows one thing. It shows, we often talk about how stations sometimes go a little cheap on some of the aspects of their own broadcasting. Well, that's an example. What is mostly important here is, hopefully, the most important stations, the one that could give us news, for example, should always be full power, even in an outage, though.
Right. It's interesting because with those stations going down like that, they do have one option available to them, and most of them were doing that, obviously. Their streaming was still running, obviously. So, there is a backup in that respect, that people listening could go online and, listen to the feed that way. But, if you're listening to the radio station, all of a sudden down goes the signal. And Normand was great. He provided us with this graph to sort of back this up, to prove to us, I'm not just making this story up here. You can actually see on the graph, what was happening. So it was pretty interesting. But everything seems to be back to normal now.
Well, at least it's better than in the 90s or 80s, because I remember back then when we had some huge power outages, they were just all off and the FM band was empty. So something that is kind of scary when you think about it, FEMA alerts broadcasters to vulnerabilities in emergency alert system devices. This is by L.A. Karras from Radio World. On Monday, August 1st, the Federal Emergency Management Agency issued a public alert about certain vulnerabilities in EAS encoder-decoder devices. FEMA said these vulnerabilities present a security concern, allowing outside actors to issue emergency alerts, whether it be via TV, radio, or cable network. In its public notice, FEMA encourages broadcasters and other EAS participants to check that their devices and supporting systems are up to date with the most recent software and security patches. The agency also asked participants to ensure that EAS devices are protected by a firewall and are monitored, with audit logs regularly reviewed looking for unauthorized access. The exploit was successfully demonstrated by Ken Pyle, a security researcher at cyber.com, and may be presented as a proof of concept at the upcoming DEF CON conference in Las Vegas, said FEMA. In short, the vulnerability is public knowledge and will be demonstrated to the large audience in the coming weeks. Closing out its remarks, FEMA said it values its partnership with broadcasters and appreciate your efforts to maintain public trust and confidence in the emergency alert system. You know, this gets close to what I also talk about a lot, which is technology and vulnerabilities and the technologies we use. I mean, nothing's perfect, and all of these systems, the software, the computers running it, all have security flaws that if somebody finds it before the security researchers do, well, they can do a lot with it. So, you know, imagine a hacker starting any kind of emergency alert across a state or even across the United States as a whole. That could create a lot of problems.
Yep, it's a good thing that they've found these these potential problems and are forcing the people using these devices to make sure that they're protected. So it's a good step by FEMA to step in there and get these stations up to par and realize that you're taking a risk if you don't keep things up to date and protect them. So a good move on FEMA's part.
Or just make sure you run Windows updates.
yeah, right. We have a story of the passing of an incredibly well-respected and well-recognized broadcaster from the United States. His name, Vin Scully. This comes from TSN Sports Network. If you're a baseball fan, you'll certainly know Vin Scully, but even just as a broadcaster in general, he was a Hall of Fame broadcaster whose dulcet tones provided the soundtrack of summer while entertaining and informing Los Angeles Dodgers fans, both when they were in Brooklyn and after that when they moved to Los Angeles. He had been broadcasting games for that baseball team for 67 years, both radio and television. He passed away on Tuesday night at the age of 94. He died in his home in the Hidden Hills section of Los Angeles, according to the team, after being informed by family members. "We have lost an icon," team president and CEO Stan Keston said in a statement. "His voice will always be heard and etched in all of our minds forever." As the longest tenured broadcaster with a single team in sports pro history, Scully saw it all and called it all. He began in the 1950s era with Pee Wee Reese, Jackie Robinson, on to the 60s with Don Drysdale and Sandy Koufax, into the 70s with Steve Garvey and Don Sutton, through the 80s with Oral Hershiser and Fernando Valenzuela. In the 90s, it was Mike Piazza and Hideo Nomo, followed by Clayton Kershaw and Manny Ramirez in the 21st century. The Dodgers changed players, managers, executives, owners, and even moved cities from Brooklyn to Los Angeles. But Scully and his soothing, insightful style remained constant for the fans, moving with the team when they moved. So we have a clip that we're going to play for you that ran on TSN, and I think you'll find it really interesting to pay tribute to Vin Scully, who passed away earlier this week.
The baseball world is mourning the last of the great storytellers. Vin Scully passed away Tuesday at the age of 94. Vin was not just a Dodger icon, but the voice of baseball for multiple generations. When many of us think of this game, we hear Vin's voice. A true gentleman, Vin's 67-year career at the Dodgers was the most by any broadcaster for any team. He will be missed.
It's time for Dodger baseball.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone. In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened.
Fastball is a high drive into deep left center field. Buckner goes back to the fence. It is gone. What a marvelous moment for Atlanta and the state of Georgia. What a marvelous moment for the country and the world. a black man is getting a standing ovation in the Deep South for breaking a record of an all-time baseball idol.
Montana looking, throwing in the end zone. Clark caught it! Dwight Clark! It's a madhouse at Candlestick. Let's all take a deep breath as we go to the most dramatic ninth inning in the history of baseball. Got him! The greatest game ever pitched. Baseball victory by Don Larson. A no-hitter, a perfect game in a World Series. So the winning run is at second base with 2 out, 3-2 to Mookie Wilson. Little roller up along first, behind the bag. It gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it.
You and I have been friends for a long time, but I know in my heart that I've always needed you more than you've ever needed me. And I'll miss our time together more than I can say. And when the upcoming winter gives way to spring, rest assured, once again, it will be time for Dodger baseball. So this is Vin Scully wishing you a very pleasant good afternoon wherever you may be.
Listening to this, it reminds me personally of, my teenage years listening to the Montreal Expos, and we had, some of those people here that, they have such a distinctive voice and way of doing their presentation of sports events.
Yeah.
And
here in Montreal, we had Dave Van Horn and Duke Snyder. That was the team that was there from the beginning. Basically, they carried the broadcast for so long.
And on the French side, one name that comes to mind, Roger Brulette, which was on CKSA, which was also, it's you just heard the voice and you immediately knew you were listening to an Expos game.
Vin Scully, he had done other sports as well, certainly not just the Dodgers games, but if you listen to NBC a lot, sports events, he covered a lot of the major ones as well. So anyways, we've lost another one of those icons in broadcasting.
Unfortunately. So what's happening with the sun? Well, the sun this week was up and down. We had some minor geomagnetic storming that was happening, with some of the solar wind brushing against the geomagnetic field of the Earth. But not a really big event this week because there's not a lot of sunspot groups. Sun is in a little quieter moment, if you want. There is an interesting sunspot that was reported. Apparently, it is so big that it's actually impacting the whole way that the sun vibrates. So we're kind of curious to see in the coming days when it actually will rotate into view what it's about, and that could actually create a lot of activity. So there's a coronal hole at the center of the sun right now that might actually create some problems with the solar wind that will be flowing from it, arriving around August 8th and 9th. So if the conditions aren't as good, maybe this is what's happening. But for the most part, we have sunspot number of 52, solar flux just above 100 at 109. And when things are quiet, conditions are still quite good, but we're starting to feel the change. Summer is moving on in the northern hemisphere, and it's starting to show on the shortwave bands that, we're slowly changing in the way that the propagation is happening. But if you want to make sure to be part of it, well, you got to turn on the radio and listen.
Hey there, I'm Paul Kaltenbach, live in Hell's Kitchen, New York City. And you're tuned to International Radio Report, 30 minutes of news about radio on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal.
We head next over to Britain with a story from The Guardian by Mark Sweeney. It was posted by Mike Terry in the UK to Glenn Hauser's World of Radio. The headline, Commercial Radio Beats BBC in Summer Numbers for the First Time Since the 1990s. Radio fans spent more time listening to commercial stations than the BBC over the first part of the summer. for the first time since the 1990s, as deep-pocketed rivals invest heavily in marketing, poaching talent, and launching new services. Continued budget cuts at the BBC have hampered the corporation's ability to invest in its own services and retain talent, with big names from Chris Moyles, Chris Evans, Eddie Mair, and more recently Andrew Marr, John Sopel, and Emily Maitlis signing lucrative deals to move to commercial radio rivals. The BBC's portfolio of radio stations, from Radio 1 to 6 Music and the Asian network, accounted for 48.1% of the almost 1 billion hours of total radio listened to by UK audiences in the 3 months to June the 26th. Radio fans spent more time listening to commercial radio than the BBC in the 3 months to the end of June. The last time the commercial radio industry led the BBC in terms of the share of listening hours was in 1999. The commercial radio industry has transformed over the last decade in particular, said Howard Barham, co-founder of audio agency Trisonic. The commercial sector has deep pockets and invested heavily. There is better quality programming and more marketing than ever. Spin-off stations of brands such as Absolute and Kiss have worked well, and national talent that once would have stayed with the BBC is now being hosted increasingly on commercial radio. In February, Global Radio, owner of stations ranging from Capital and Heart to Classic FM, once again flexed its financial muscle by signing deals with Maitlis and Sopel, who will join former colleagues Marr at LBC, reportedly doubling their salaries in the process. Global Europe's biggest commercially funded radio group is controlled by Monaco-based Michael Tabor, who has made a fortune estimated by the Sunday Times at over £600 million from a combination of investments in gambling, buying Bet Victor in 2014, plus a string of thoroughbred racehorses. And 6 years ago, Rupert Murdoch moved to become a force in UK radio by paying £220 million for the wireless group, home to brands such as Virgin Radio and Talk Sports, and signing stars on those stations as well. He has since, with his News UK, has since launched new services called Talk Radio and Times Radio, which are stablemates of the Times newspaper. And they go on with other services that have surfaced as well. The commercial radio sector passed the BBC in terms of weekly reach, the number of listeners back in the last quarter of 2015. The latest figures show that on an average, 32.9 million listeners tune into BBC each week, while 36.2 million listen to commercial stations. Of concern for the BBC, commercial radio stations also continue to substantially outperform the public broadcaster among listeners aged under 45.
There's a few things that can happen in here. Often public broadcasters have one problem that the commercial broadcasters often do not suffer. It sometimes, unfortunately, sounds a little more for the older generation. They have a problem adapting to a younger audience compared to commercial radio that often targets younger audience immediately from the start. The other thing we see here, and it's simple. BBC having budget cuts and commercial stations having a lot of money to invest on personalities that people love. And if you have that big radio host that everybody loves, you pay him more, he goes to a commercial station, gets away from the BBC, people are going to follow.
It's really interesting to see those numbers, though, and the billion hours listened to radio. It's a good sign for radio for sure. People are just changing what they want to listen to, though, and by these commercial companies, giving them more options, it's obviously working for some of them, and people are leaving what they may have held on to for a very long time, and saying, hey, let's go try something new. It's a new restaurant in town. Let's go check it out.
What's interesting also is to see, BBC public broadcaster still, when you look at the numbers, it's still a very popular broadcaster on radio. Nicaragua's government shutters 6 church radio stations. This is by Gabriela Seltzer from the Associated Press. Nicaraguan authorities ordered the closure of 6 radio stations belonging to the Roman Catholic Church on Monday and surrounded one with riot police, church officials said. Reverend Rolando Alvarez, the bishop of the northern province of Matagalpa, said during Mass that he had received a letter from the state telecommunications agency Telcor informing him of the closures. Alvarez called the move an injustice and urged Telcor's director to show the legality. The bishop has been one of Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega's most outspoken critics in the church. He has called for the release of prisoners, including a number of political opposition leaders, and earlier this year went on a hunger strike to protest what he called police persecution against him. Alvarez also said Monday that police had occupied the parish house in Sabaco, where one of the radio stations operated. We want to make clear that if they touch one of our priests, they touch the entire diocese, the statement said. I am being besieged. The police have broken the chapel's locks to enter where the radio equipment is to take it, he wrote. The police are attacking the faithful who are inside the school next door. The government did not comment publicly on the radio station closures. During recent months, Ortega's government has closed more than 1,000 non-governmental groups. So, controlling the media, controlling what's said on the radio. Another story from what's happening. We don't have a lot of news from that part of the world in the recent years, but we can see that it's still difficult and it's touchy.
It's a predominantly Catholic country. They're going to be listening to Catholic radio stations, and when those stations are outspoken critics of the president, it doesn't surprise me that this is happening. But again, it's dangerous business out there, and to see them moving in, and you wonder how the population will react to that, because it is a very religious country, and when they start stepping on the toes of the church and their broadcasting, there may be some kickback to something like that.
So we have upcoming ham radio contests.
Yeah, we have a few this week. Not a lot going on, but some interesting ones. The Worked All Europe DX Contest, CW, 0100 Zulu August 13th to 2359 August 14th. That one is organized by a very active club, the Deutsche Amateur Radio Club. The bands are 3.5, 7, 14, 21, and 28 megahertz, and it is CW only.
There's the Straight Key Century Club Weekend Sprintathon, 12 Zulu August 13th to 2359 Zulu August 14th. The Sprintathon is open to all licensed amateurs as well as shortwave listeners. All participants must use a straight key, sideswiper, or bug unless you qualify for an exemption. Bands 160 through 6 meters, no work bands, and of course, it is CW only.
We have one CUSO party this week. The Maryland DC CUSO Party, 1400 Zulu August 13th to 0400 Zulu August 14th. That's organized by the Anne Arundel Radio Club. The Maryland DC CUSO Party is to promote ham radio throughout the state of Maryland and the DC area. The idea is to contact as many stations in Maryland and Washington, D.C. The bands contact on work bands and 60 meters are not allowed. All other bands may be used, and all modes, phone, CW, and digital.
So lots of stuff to either listen to or participate.
Yep, and we do thank you for listening to us. It is time for us to move on for this week, though. Our time is up. We thank you for tuning in, and as we said at the beginning of the show, if you haven't checked out our Facebook group, we'd really recommend that you do. There's lots of great stories there that we don't get to on the show, and we do post up most of the stories that we do cover on the show, so if you want to read through them, they are there for you. So that's on Facebook groups. It is called International Radio Report. Have a great week, everybody. We will talk to you again next Sunday morning with the next edition of the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal. Bye-bye for now.
Täällä Suomen Yleisradio. This is Radio Finland calling